Hello, and welcome to the Weshtern Philosophy Podcast. Two friends with oceans and oceans discussing the unseen forces in our lives through the lens of music, mystery, and crack. Today, Bart and Anthony discuss the origins and principles of the podcasht itself under the topic of conversation. A lot of our Western philosophy comes from Greek and Roman thinkers, During the Roman Empire, the heart of civilization was Rome. In the entire world, known world, the most civilized place was Rome. The further you got from Rome, the less civilized you were. So Ireland was considered the most uncivilized, most barbaric country. We were the barbarians to the Romans. So we were the westernmost country. So we were the most barbaric country, and we are on the western part, the most barbaric part of the most barbaric, uncivilized country. The furthest you can get from Western philosophy. That's why we are Westerners. What of art?
Good morning, you
beautiful. Don't let me disturb you. Finish
morning, you beautiful bastard. I was still mid stretch.
Yeah, you finish your stretch there, man.
So one of the issues.
Oh, you're really going for it.
Oh yeah, I've been inspired by Dermy. Like, he's always so good before he starts playing Bauron. Just really get everything going. Right, I'm loose. Loose. But it's so funny that, like, out of all the feedback we've gotten about the podcast, which has all been positive, the only thing we've gotten a bit of grief over was the title being Paddy Wackery with the Western, Since that's happened, I've started using that sound in my speech nearly completely every day.
Yeah. And it's funny how it's gone out there, because I had somebody just text me going, lovely episode of the podcasht, CASHT, and
because we never talked about why we named it that, did we?
We didn't. I'm going to
might be good to do it actually. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I had to bring the car is still an issue. I had to bring the other car, actually, my wife's car, into the garage, and I couldn't bring my normal potting gear when Anthony was picking me up. So that's why there might be a bit more popping. There might be a bit of weirdness because I'm on a different mic. Mm-hmm. For the audiophiles amongst you, I'm sorry. For the people who use my tones as ASMR.
Where's my apology as the person who has to edit this? Where am I in this?
No, you love all that.
I do.
I love working on little things.
I love wrestling with an audio
with the untamed power of my voice.
I've said this off mic so many times. It's so true. Like, I also take photos. Photos are easy. Photo is easy. Video is easy. Like, of course,
video
it's a skill. It's a skill, but oh my God, audio is so tricky. Like, the fact that we are trying to get vibrating air molecules, turn them into an electronic signal, and then turn them back into vibrating air molecules it's so difficult. And there's no, what would you say? There's no compensating for it. Like, if the file is not good going in, there's no saving it. You know, so it's so fucking tricky.
And it makes you respect people who do really tricky podcasts or really tricky radio or something. Like, even you and I both listen to that Dungeons and Daddies podcast, D&D, funny D&D podcast. But they sometimes they'll let you hear bits where they've not edited or stuff they've edited out or something, and then you go, oh yeah, it does always run very smoothly.
Oh yeah,
they just make it so streamlined that everything, there's none of the stuff where someone is looking for shit and whatever. It's just like boom, boom, boom. But
very tightly edited, so we don't do that.
We don't. Anthony for some reason refuses to do that.
I did it for the first episode. I started editing out loads of pauses and ums and ahs, and if there was just a 3 or 4 second gap between sentences, I edited it out, and it started to sound like a TikTok reel, and it stopped sounding like a conversation, which is the topic of today's pod, which is why I'm talking about audio files. But you brought up the title of the pod, which I think we should.
Yeah, because we've never. I thought in a way it was evident, but it might be good to talk
Not
about
evident
it because, well, maybe I don't know why I thought it would be evident. Even it's a bit silly, but So we the thing that got us into the idea of the podcast was always a bit of inside baseball. But sure, if you're still with us after fucking 11 of these things, you probably don't mind.
Yeah.
Or you're probably family. But anyway, hello family.
Hello family.
Hello. But so what would happen is that I don't know if we mentioned this before, but what would happen is that me and Anthony would have chats in the various lunchroom establishments of
Morning
County Clare.
Dew and This Is It back when it was still open, and
and sometimes Cheese Press.
Yeah.
And but we'd be chatting away for hours. And people would then go after 2 hours or
they'd
so.
be like sat at the table next to us.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair to them, it usually, especially This Is It, close quarters. Like, you can't really avoid the conversation next to you. But it was always such a funny kind of dual-pronged thing where someone would go, on the one hand, I'm very sorry that I've eavesdropped to literally everything you've said, including all your personal life, for the last 2 hours. On the other hand, I really enjoyed it, so apparently that makes up for the fact that I've been listening.
Well, it was like, this sounds a bit self-indulgent, and it sounds a bit like, oh my God, we're so important. But like, it literally happened 3 or 4 times.
Oh, more than that. You're being modest, but I don't know if we're very special. Is what you're trying to say.
And we did talk about like the idea of a pod for like a full year before we recorded an episode. And I think if something's still knocking around your head after a year, you probably have to fucking do something with it.
Yeah, but but to be serious, so I'm a bit in a contrarian mood this morning. But it wasn't like anything special. But I do think, like, when I first discovered podcasts, there is something really nice about a long form conversation between two people, and maybe it's just that our voices carry, or that we did it so often as well that we do meet quite regularly for lunch dates and stuff. And people enjoyed listening, and I always thought the reason they enjoyed listening was because we're horrible gossips, so that's always great.
That helps.
And then we'd also have a thing where we like to kind of go, oh, there was that thing that happened down the street. Why do you think that was so interesting?
Yeah,
because it did something. It resonated with me, but I don't know why. And we would kind of unpick things. I think that was something people liked. And then if you have a nice kind of amiable relationship, then I suppose that's a good vibe.
I remember that's something we were worried about going into this, that we would agree with each other too much. Like, should we manufacture a bit of drama?
Yeah, exactly. Because and then the things we probably don't agree on, it would be far too heavy. Like, oh God, go into nitty gritty. But so I think the idea was that, okay, apparently there is something that we do that is kind of philosophizing a little bit, but at a very non-academic way, and that was,
Sorry, no, it's you know, I did a little bit. Did I do philosophy? No, I did English. I've.
Philosophy. In all the amazing teachings that the monks up the hill taught me, I do not remember everything that I learned, but I am a scholar.
Well, what I'm trying to remember is, like, did I ever take any official classes in Western philosophy? And I don't think I did. I went to a few philosophy society things, and I took classes in Chinese philosophy, Eastern philosophy, and that's one of the reasons I really like the name Western philosophy, because, like you said, we're talking about things, we're talking about maybe what's behind things, or we were when we were chatting in the cafes, and we were giving it our best guess. Yeah. But, you know, there was no rigorous academic framework. And one of the things, and academics might jump down my throat about this, but for me, one of the main differentiating factors between Western astrology and Eastern astrology is that Eastern astrology is more directly applicable, whereas Western astrology is a lot about, like, playing with logical forms and, like, picking things apart.
Astrology or philosophy?
Philosophy. God, okay, yeah.
Good.
Western philosophy is more about logic and rationale and reason and I think, therefore I am, and these kind of things. Whereas, like, Eastern philosophy was a bit more zen and mad and emotional almost. And I think that was the other side of it, is that, like, our ability to talk about these things is not very academic, you know? So I think that's why we decided to call it Western philosophy, because it very much isn't Western philosophy. Yeah. And that if I have a philosophical background, it is an Eastern philosophy. But we are located in not just the West, but the West.
And that's the thing that really ties us together and there's more that ties us together, but I mean, it's all grounded in here. And I have never heard anyone refer to the west of Ireland as the west of Ireland. Like maybe someone who was looking for it on a journey, but like people would always say the West, and it would kind of make a joke about it as well. But even when I lived in Galway, it was always like West is best and all that. So we thought like, we actually don't want to talk about Western philosophy, but Western philosophy kind of shows you in a way that it will be more grounded.
Yep.
It's and where it's placed, and it's a very quick way. Instead of going, the philosophy of the west of Ireland, but then even then it would be too high a concept. I was just thinking when you were saying about directly applicable philosophy that like so often listening to podcasts, you just want to hear people's take on something. Yeah. Like I was listening to comedian Shane Gillis explain Pearl Harbor, and you're just like. And it's so funny because they call like the clips as well. They call him like Professor Gillis, and so they clearly already know that it's like, why the fuck would you be listening to this for your information? Because it's just like, the boys went wild, and this is what happened, but it's kind of like it's just an entertaining take on it. It's like when the two Johnnies talked about Irish mythology and Cuchulainn and stuff, and it was just their take on it. And it's kind of more entertaining. It's like an oral tradition in a way.
Yes.
It's more entertaining to hear someone's take on something, and also the bits they leave in and leave out and change than necessarily the academic version of it.
Like when you write it down, you put it in a textbook, and then you start teaching it in a course. It has to become very rigid and set. And the other reason I liked the West is that, and I'll credit my buddy Neil O'Brien, the Gaeilgeoir and the historian, for introducing me to this concept. But during the Roman Empire, so a lot of our Western philosophy comes from Greek and Roman thinkers. So during the Roman Empire, the heart of civilization was Rome. In the entire world, known world, the most civilized place was Rome. The further you got from Rome, the less civilized you were. So Ireland was considered, Hibernia was the most uncivilized, most barbaric country. And that's like the root of the word barbaric. We were the barbarians to the Romans. So we were the westernmost country. So we were the most barbaric country, and we are on the western part. So we are in the western part, the most barbaric part of the most barbaric, uncivilized country. The furthest you can get from Western philosophy in that thinking. So that's why we are lovely. Westerners.
And I like isn't that also the thing with Beyond the Pale?
Yeah, that's right.
Like I like that. I was looking that up. I always thought that was a specifically Irish thing, but I think the Pale had something to do with the boundaries of the village or something. And if you went beyond that, then you were in the wildlands kind of. But then again, in Ireland, the Pale means the east part where all the better agricultural lands were and stuff. And
so they were given over to the Pale is settlers.
Like where we are. Then Tommy Tiernan has this lovely sketch about this where what is he say now? It's like he has this thing talking about how far we are kind of beyond the center of things, which is I like how you described that there. That's a nice that speaks to me. But what did he say again? It was something like, if Europe is the town, England is the halting site, and Ireland is the ditch or something. Now the problem is, we're getting to the root of the problem as well, because this all sounds negative. Like we clearly love all this. I love to be connected with that. I used to live in the town. I am a continental European, but I prefer this much more.
Well, I think
the wildness.
I think it is the wildness, and I think what we're maybe getting at is that there is a way to engage with these issues that is non-logical, non-rational, non-academic, that is maybe based a little bit more on imperfect, long-form conversation, on engaging with land, on engaging with very small-scale communities, and that approach to dealing with big issues is equally valid. And
100%. And I think that's what we love, and that's the thing that moves us much more than a rational explanation of things. Like, hey, in my day-to-day life, I noticed this thing. What is it? We thought about also naming it something like unseen things or something, because a lot of the things we were talking about were actually kind of or is it in the tagline?
Well, what's it? Two friends with oceans and oceans discussing the unseen forces in our lives through the lens of music, mystery, and crack. Yeah, you'd think I'd be able to remember that a bit more easily, given how often I record it. If I was clever, I'd record it once and drop it in, but I record it for every episode.
I'll do it a bit more. I'll do it a bit more often as well. But then there was someone who said that Weshtern had a paddywhackery feel to them, because it's like, oh, that's not the way. That's nearly a derogatory thing, and all I'd say about that is no. It is the way I've always heard this region talked about, and I love that. Yeah. And the West is not the same to me. The West is like America, Europe, something like that. Yeah. So
this is not the West.
That's all we have to say about that. But it's nice to kind of talk a bit more about this, because we've gotten into the podcast and we never talked about the origin.
And there's people around here like Eddie Lenihan, and Eddie's known as being a storyteller and a man who knows everything about the fairies. But Eddie's a lifelong academic. Yeah. Like, you read any of his texts, they're anthropological research texts. Like, he's an absolute academic, but he does not overtly wear the trappings of that. Like, he communicates his findings through story,
Oh, I love him.
Yeah,
I love him. I was such one of our second guest, John Lillis. Yeah. Who invited me and Trish O'D to play at a Lenihan storytelling afternoon, and you were there as well, and I just loved that. That was such an honor. I think he actually asked Trish, and Trish asked me to come along, and he said, "Yeah, that's fine." But so it was all, But I love just being there with him and just to be able to. I think I went up to, that kind of thing, meet your heroes and all that. And I'm always so aware when I talk to people who are in the public eye to kind of think about what is it like for them, and not to... Now, I think generally in Ireland, celebrity is people just... It makes you very available to people because it's all closely knit anyway, and then people just go, oh, talk to you. So I was a bit like, he was getting ready for his gig, and I didn't want to. But we were just chatting, standing around, and I was just thinking, I was a bit nervous about it. So I was a bit like, I just want this to go okay. I just want people to go, Eddie Lennon was there was some music. Not like, it was the most amazing music, but more like, I didn't want them to go, there was music, and Jesus, they nearly fucked it up or whatever.
Yeah, you wanted to support Eddie.
Yeah, exactly. With that as well. Yeah, I just wanted that to be. But it was so lovely because I went up to him and I was like, he's like, oh, where are you living? And I was like, oh, I'm living in Kilnaboy now. And he looked at me and he said, Kilnaboy. Sure, there's more to it than meets the eye. And I was like, thank you. That's all I will need. I'm done. Thank you. It was just perfect, perfect, yeah.
Do you know the Irish word sketamini?
No.
So it almost is what it sounds like. It's one of those words that I think it's a Terry Pratchett quote. It's like, describes something that doesn't make a noise, but if it did make a noise, it would sound like sketamini. Oh. So it's like nervous excitement.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember like Trish definitely had a bit of sketamini to be playing around. And like the kids had sketamini, and I had sketamini as well, or sketamini was upon me, sketamini Urim.
Oh, lovely.
And there was so much excitement in that room. And I remember standing there at the back and just watching like a score of kids trot out of there with books in their hands, Eddie's books, and I'm like...
lovely bookshop as well,
Scalella, that's right, yeah. Brilliant location. But I just loved that what Eddie's doing in collecting these stories and keeping them alive. I mean, have you read things like In Search of Biddy Early?
No, I've heard some of his stories on John and his podcast, some of the Biddy Early story. I've read Meeting the Other Crowd, I think is the one, and I'm reading one now with my daughter. That's a lot of like Cullen stories and stuff, but I haven't gotten to that one. Yeah,
In Search of Biddy Early like talks about his like being in search of her, like going out and finding the stories about her, which is really interesting. He talks about how I hope I get this right. It was a while since I read it, but I think he was talking to somebody about someone else, and he was out interviewing them with his wee tape recorder and stuff. And Billie Early came up, and he was like, "I'm not talking about her. She was a bad woman. I'm not talking about her." So obviously Eddie gets very interested in Billie Early, and he kind of can't really find a way in. And then 2 years later or something, he's out driving. He gets lost, so he pulls the car over, walks up, knocks on the door of the house. And a woman opens the door and she's like, "I know you are, and I'm not telling you anything about Billie Early."
Oh, yes.
And he's like, "Interesting." And he gets her to talk anyway, and it's and she gives him other names, and it kind of cracks open the mystery of Billie Early. But it shows how powerful that connection is, that conversation, because all of this data was gathered through conversation. It's all field recordings, you know. He's not leafing through books and things like this. And to access that information, he had to have a relationship with the person where they were willing to. And this woman had, like, it was something to do with her house, and she reckoned Billie Early had cursed her grandfather or something like that. It's bad land or something. So that's the thing about, there's almost something easy about an academic approach to these things. There's almost something easy. It's just like, you just need to apply, a Cartesian approach to this, or you just need to read a bit of Baudrillard or Sartre or something like this, or you can take apart the whole concept of knowledge with Kierkegaard or Heidegger or something, or whoever it is, or we can, undermine the concept of meaning with Nietzsche and stuff. And to be honest, I quite enjoy all of those guys, but I think
they're not bad lads.
They're not bad
lads.
Well,
Nietzsche had his obvious flaws, but
no, Nietzsche was he was fine. It was his philosophy was warped and adopted by a bunch of bad lads.
It wasn't himself. Oh,
no, Nietzsche's a bit misunderstood. His whole thing is God is dead. So he's like, basically the society has rendered the ability of God to provide comfort and succor to us. It has really undermined it. So we now realize that we don't need God because we're in a bit more control of our lives. So God is dead. But his point was then, what do you replace that with?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and I think that's the bit that is often not focused on with Nietzsche. No, Nietzsche's
just
very
replace it with nihilism. Please.
Yeah, exactly. So that was not what he was about.
But it's like, in a way, it's an obvious point that you're making. I don't mean that in a bad way, but like that I hadn't thought about it that way. That it is very analytical. The Western philosophy. Like, I even remember kind of when you started to talk about the basic strands of ethics. Where it's deontology and consequentialism and stuff, and you're like, okay, so it's either it's this system or we're applying this system. Yeah. Whereas, like you say, like that more storied, applied, there is something, that search for the unseen is such a deep kind of graw for me, kind of like, and you don't know why. I have a feeling I might have referenced this story, but maybe it's on one of the podcasts that we threw out. But there was, I got that book, Meeting
the Other Crowd.
Is it Meeting the Other Crowd?
Yeah.
I'd like to. I nearly want to look it up so I don't reference it wrong, but it's.
I think it is.
And just look up Eddie's bibliography, but Yvonne said to me like, we read to me for bedtime for a story, and it's this story of a priest going out to someone who's dying, and then they meet a fairy in the road. And the fairy says, you need to ask this dying man whether on Judgment Day will the fairies be let into heaven. And even when I'm saying it now, I'm feeling it, So this is, okay, I'll just carry on. I'll just do quickly, like read it. It's much nicer then. But it's quite long. And then he goes to the dying man and nothing happens for a while. And then suddenly the dying man, I think actually after he's just died or something, he gets up. He goes, the only people that be let into heaven are those with blood in their veins. And in this particular fairy story, the fairies are kind of the green men nearly, more of a wood kind of base. And so they go back and they meet the fairy again. And they say, like, only people with blood in their veins will be let into the kingdom of heaven. And then fairy gets very angry and breaks his fiddle. Says, you no longer we have our music, and you will no longer be safe from us at nighttime on the roads. Something like that. And I really don't know what that story means, but I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's much better when you read it. Go read it. Also, funny thing is, Yvonne said, "Read it to me. I'll fall asleep." So she was kind of drifting off, and she was asleep after 2 pages. Not because it wasn't a good story, but just she was tired. And I was there going, "Now I'm in this world on my own." So what I actually did, which I'd never done before, is I kept reading it out like for 20 minutes after she was asleep.
Wow.
Just it felt like I needed to expel the words rather than just consume them.
Mm-hmm.
But like the invisible thing we're talking about, my tale here goes nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's interesting.
Yeah, and that's you won't be able to teach that on a university course, most likely, Bart.
Exactly.
But it's powerful to you. And, you know, the way we communicate is not perfect. It's not academic. It's not edited. Like, the way human beings communicate is, like, ever-changing. Like, you know, it's one of those things where as two people converse, they each change each other. You know, like I'll remember having conversations with people where we're talking about a topic, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm on this side of the topic," you know, and we talk about it, and by the end of it, you're like talking about the other side of the topic. So like within 5 minutes, technically you've flip-flopped, right? Technically you've contradicted yourself or something, but in the moment, both are true.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is just examining both sides or changing as you think about it. And like I think like you telling the story, oftentimes we'll start with a topic here, and it's more that I have like a feeling that there's meat on the topic, that there's stuff to talk about, but I don't know what we're going to say. And then it's so interesting that it's like in the talking, do you get to know it? And not in a way like, because I think that's one of the principles of the pod as well. One of the principles usually of conversation is like, we don't really answer any of the questions we raise.
No, and I'm noticing as well with the podcast, to go a bit meta again, that I actually, when we hold the topic very lightly as we're doing now, where it's not necessarily, let's go back to the topic, it's more like a normal conversation we would have. And that's actually nice. Like normally when we sit down for coffee, we don't go, "So Anthony, today we're going to talk about this."
On the agenda is...
Like there's definitely something nice about having a topic, and I really like it with the guests as well, because it aims the conversation in a certain direction, but you never know what's going to come up. What's interesting as well about what you just said about that flip-flopping, or where you're on the other side of it by the end of a conversation, I really find in myself a tendency to hold the opposing view. And not to stir up shit, because I also like harmony. But like if someone is very much on this side of a topic, I kind of feel like, I'm doing my hand gesture on the one side. Anyway,
do it to the camera.
Well, but it's like if someone is completely on the left, just in a abstract sense of something, I will go, this right part is completely being ignored. Yeah, intuitively, I always feel like, I remember this about, like in Holland you have, or in the Netherlands, you have like these more like old-fashioned fraternity, sorority kind of things for students, you know, which I don't think is a thing around here at all. Like they will have old buildings in cities, and they will have a lot of like ceremony and heavy drinking, and there's kind of a humiliating initiation ceremony in which has been talked about a lot in the Netherlands, because people have actually died during those, and it's very, like the people who are part of those clubs say it's very good because it's very bonding. You're going through something awful together, but I've personally never, that's not something I do very well. I don't like being, like my boundaries being crossed and then going, this is all fine, this is part of the process. I would just go, fuck you. I'm not doing it. So I was never part of one, but I do see kind of some value to them. But I remember that would be a thing where other students would fall really to one side or the other of. Like in the town I was going to university in Nijmegen, it wasn't a strong fraternity, sorority town. So the ones that were there were very vehement because they were like, they had to counterbalance as well, you know. So you would have people who were like all for it, and then I would kind of go, well, listen, lads, I really don't like what you do with the making people drink 20 gallons of water or just, you know, like throwing eggs on them and that kind of crack. But then if someone be like, oh, geez, can you believe that anyone would ever do that? I'm like, yeah, no, I can understand. Like, it's that I just, yeah.
Yeah, this is, I wonder, is there a word for this? I often think when I'm talking to, let's say, a patient who has been wronged, you know, and I'm like, you know, you were wronged terribly, you know, and you can say like you did nothing wrong, and often that is true. But also there are situations where you are 95% in the right. You are 98% in the right. But you're still 2% in the wrong. And they're not equal. But acknowledging that 2% gives you back your agency. Yeah. Because you, if stuff is done to you, you are pretty passive. But if you have a small role in it, and I think the really important thing here is that we have such binary thinking that you can say, oh, are you saying we're both wrong? I'm saying, like, yes, you're both wrong, but in no way are both sides equally wrong. You know, like one side is 98% wrong, but one side is 2% wrong. And sometimes, not always, like if you spend the same amount of time talking about the 2% and the 98%, you've
That's
lost.
odd,
But acknowledging that, it's like saying, you know, some people think the world is the Earth is a flat disc. Yeah. And they're wrong. Yeah. And some people think the world is the Earth is a sphere. Yeah. And they're wrong. Yeah. But they're not equally wrong. You know, the people that think the Earth is a sphere are far, far closer. It's an oblong spheroid. It's a bit you know, it's a little bit wider at the equator. It's got a couple of mountains, a couple of valleys. Yeah. It's brought closer, way closer to being a sphere than it is to being a disc.
But it also depends on which dimension are you measuring it on. Like in people's imagination, it was definitely for a really long time, and also in our experience, it feels flat. Like when I'm driving over to you, I'm not like, oh, I'm going rimwards, or I'm going upwards to Widdershins. Yeah, that's to reference Terry Pratchett again, as we always do. I have a bit of an antipathy for people who are like, no, but it is this. It really is this. And you could be like a bit like you say, like, yeah, 98%, yeah. Like, I hear you. And most of the time when I meet people like that who are like, no, it definitely is this. And there's usually a bit of fire behind it, you know, especially if it's about big topics. But I always feel a bit like, yeah, but can you really not see the other side of this? Like, especially when we're talking about, we won't go too deep or dark now, but like when we're talking about the big divisive topics, and if like people are pretty split on them, you see this in America a lot because they have a two-party system, I think, and some other problems. But like you will on their big social issues, people be like, it's this or it's that, and I'm like, if so much of the country thinks that way, can you really not try and see the other side? That doesn't mean, and then now another thing then that people have invented to make you shut up, which is usually, that's something we can talk about with conversation as well, silencing people. But is that they go, oh, are you two-siding it or something?
Yeah, like a get off the fence kind of thing.
It's kind of, I think and then they always reference our friend being Donald Trump, who we don't like, don't worry. No. But it's like, well, or do worry, or do whatever you want to do. But it's, they reference kind of when he was saying, oh, there's two sides to Tiki Torch, blah, 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 you know, all that stuff. But it's more like if there's a big social issue and some people are really focusing on this thing and then other people are really focusing on that thing, you're like, are you really not able to for a moment step out of that? And okay, I'll do a semi-controversial one, but not the most controversial one. During the pandemic, there were a lot of people having some kind of conspiracy story of like, Bill Gates is putting microchips into vaccines. Now, even when I say it, I'm laughing at it.
We need something louder than a bell for the word vaccines.
I know. Well, I think they've lifted most of the.
Anyway, go on.
The
I remember this.
on that again. But like the people would go like, there's microchips and thing, and then people just go, that is so stupid, anti-science, blah blah. I'm like, yeah, I think that is not a reality. But also, can you not have enough empathy to think, what are they actually saying?
Yeah.
Because the fact that a lot of control was exercised by that person, I think, is blatantly evident. And if you don't think that, then I suggest you look a bit of that up. But even then, that's fine. Like, that's another thing. If somebody disagrees with that, fine, I understand. Mm-hmm. And even when I said it, I giggled slightly. So there is something a bit silly about it.
Yeah.
But I just think that the thing we need to learn is when there are strong differing opinions to kind of hear the other person out a little bit.
Well, you talked about the States and a two-party system which has all these problems. But like a lot of the way to, in my opinion, I'm gonna hot take here, lads. I'm gonna fix American politics.
Nice, good man.
But just in terms of humanity, is you got to chat to people who disagree with you.
Yeah.
You've got to talk with people you've got to speak to people who have differing views, and you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to convince them. They don't have to convince you. But it's very rare that you talk to somebody where you are 100% in opposition to every aspect. Now, they do exist. I've met them. I've like stood in front of people and being like, we are not even the same species,
Yeah.
But those people are kind of rare. Like, you know, and definitely with two-party things, if you really think strongly about something like big government versus small government, or, abortion or something, if you're really committed to that one issue, well, you have to join the party that matches your alignment on that one issue. And now you're in bed with them on all their other opinions, which is, not great. I remember Noam Chomsky had this great line. He was like, people say there's two sides to every issue. There isn't. For some issues, there's one side. For some issues, there's 10 sides. Yeah. And you talk about like the microchips and in the jabs thing. I mean, that's obviously nonsense. But what's behind it? There's a fear behind it. There's a questioning of the exertion of control. There's a questioning of medical consent. There's a questioning of the role of technology in maintaining our health, and there's just, while the thing itself is daft and easy to disprove, what's behind it, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but people are obviously concerned about it, so it's probably worth chatting about.
Well, and this is the thing. So I'm not saying anything about that topic itself, because I have friends who are on every side of the vaccine issue. And like you and I have talked about that at length, and I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of that because it is boring. But the thing that really interests me about it is allowing speech. And the thing that did get my goat during that time was people saying, no, well, obviously, shut up, And then a lot of the stuff that was made to shut up now turns out to be absolutely right. And then it's like, so what does that mean? Have you learned anything from that? Not have you learned anything from that medically, because I have no credentials to do that. I did a bit of medical ethics, so I could say something about ethics in that. Maybe that's also one of the reasons that kind of gets to me, because that is something I do know a bit about, but I don't know anything about the nuance. Definitely not like yourself. But I have such a strong feeling that we need to be able to converse. Yeah. Because firstly, my mind has been changed so often by it.
Yeah, mine too.
I have learned how I think about things. Like, so often you and I be talking, and I hear myself saying something that I've literally not thought in the privacy of my own head. And then it's there, and it's like, oh, thank God I was talking to Anthony because it came out. Yeah. Oh, that's how I feel. I don't know if that's a weird thing that I have, but I think a lot of people have that, where you will only figure out how you feel when you're actually doing that thing. And then when people, I know that then in Ireland there's a bit of a talk about this now, where it's like, oh, we need to clamp down on hate speech online. I'm like, you kind of can't. You nearly can. Like, maybe you can on like express hate speech, but you can't
incitement to violence. And
yeah,
like
exactly. If you're like, we're gonna go out there and we're gonna do this thing, I understand that one, but like, you can't make it very narrow and go, oh, these are all the things we don't want to be talking about, and we will tell you what the things are that you can talk about, because that's not how that works. And it needs to be the exploratory thing of the 2%, kind of. I'm actually sorry I've steered us into those waters, but I do think, as you said before, it is a core sentiment of the podcast is, open and free
and
conversation.
Imperfect. Because that's the thing about conversation, is like, it's not perfect. No. Like, you'll stumble over it. And I remember watching, like, did you ever watch the Dick Cavett show? He's an old talk show.
Yeah, Bits.
You know, you'd have...
He was good.
He was phenomenal. And I think one of the reasons he was phenomenal, like, nowadays we have great interviewers like, Graham Norton, or we had Parkinson up until a few years ago. And they're so slick and they're so funny. Dick Cavett was a bit bumbling.
Yeah.
He'd intentionally make jokes that didn't land. He'd stammer. He'd like, he'd get into conversational dead ends and shrug his shoulders. And my theory is that a bit of that was put on to make his guests feel more comfortable and open up a little bit more, because he demonstrated imperfection in communication and in hosting and in questioning. And he had like people... he had like, Hugh Hefner on with, women's rights activists. And he had, was it Stephen Baldwin he had on with like a politician that was like banning black people from businesses and stuff. Like, he had really, really not just people with differences of opinion, but differences of like the fundamental principles of how they live their lives. But they were able to come on and have chats. There is a space between people where these things can be explored. And I think one of the things that maybe, I don't know where it came from, I'm not going to speculate, but I think we now have this idea that if two people come together with two different opinions, one has to win and one has to lose. And I don't really believe that, No. I think if you're having a conversation with somebody whose opinions differ greatly from your own, your job is to express yourself as well as possible. And I find that a beautiful thing to do. Like, if I'm faced with somebody who's really challenging me, I'm like, I can't control you, but I can control how I engage with this topic. And like, if you're really challenging me, I'm like, okay, do I really believe in what I'm saying? And if it is yes, it's beautiful. It's like a whetstone. It makes you razor sharp. And I'm way beyond trying to convince anyone of anything, especially in the moment.
Yeah.
Because what I've found is that the few times I have been able to, I'm not going to say I did this, but a few times a conversation with somebody who differed in opinion has led to them changing their mind. It wasn't in the moment. No. It was, they went away, came back sometimes years later. And And
also the times that people have said to me, oh, something you said really changed my mind, it was nearly always when I didn't have the intention to change their mind, when I was just talking about my experience.
Yeah.
Because when you put pressure on people, they really don't like it.
Pride comes up and ego and
but
resistance.
That's even saying it in a negative way. Like, I really think we do want to be free. And if control is being exerted, even on a one-on-one basis, we just naturally kind of close off and go, fuck that. Yeah. Whereas actually, if you can lovingly disagree, I had this with a friend where...
we have startings.
You have startings. Yeah, no, it was funny because I thought it was the big tank upstairs going again. I hope you all enjoy all these audio vignettes.
I'll try to record it sometime.
Yeah, but I had a really big fundamental disagreement with a friend one time, and we really got into it. And then he just went, I was like, oh Jesus, that was a bit, after like coming out of it a bit, and I was like, that was a bit heavy. And he was like, yeah, but I love you. So, and that was really moving to me, because I was a bit like, oh God, we really came to a point where there was a quite substantial disagreement on how the world is. The funny thing is, it's hardly ever on what you want it to be. Everyone kind of wants peace and harmony. It's kind of how we view the road towards that usually. Yeah. But the fact that he was able to step out and go, oh, but I love you, it was really moving to me. Because it's like, it isn't, that's all fine. And I think that's with you and me as well. I remember we had a reasonably firm disagreement about something. It was also because we were in different continents and talking on the phone. But it was so clear that we were both like, yeah, that's all safe in this relationship.
Yes.
And that's a very nice thing when you can just say ridiculous things, even things you don't mean or that sound horrible. It's so liberating. And when we're going through this thing of like, no, it all has to be one way. It's a bit like monocrop agriculture.
Yeah.
You know, it deadens the soil and nothing will grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think just there's something beautiful in imperfection. It's like with art, where like, I was at a concert once where the artist before every song explained what the song was about and how you should feel about it. And I just got so irrationally angry.
I can see it. I can see it in front of me. You sitting there, arms folded, chin like sticking out,
gripping, and I was just perform the piece and let me feel the piece, and then afterwards you can be like, for a bit of context, this is what I intended, and like I'm cool, but like don't try to police my reaction to it, because the beauty of art is because it's a little bit ambiguous. Yeah, everyone's reaction is personalized, and that's the power of it. Like we were talking about this a bit with Joe Flynn, where he's like, if you read a book that describes a dragon, everybody's dragon looks a little bit different. If you watch a film that has a dragon, everyone's seeing the same thing. So music is even more towards the abstract. So to be told how to feel at the start of the songs was I found it, I was like, you're really undermining it there, you know. And that's where imperfection in communication can come in as well. Like when you just throw out a sentence that's like poorly conceived and maybe you're not expressing yourself well and stuff. And look, it's easy to tear it to shreds, but to actually reach past that and go, oh, right, what are they trying to say? I think this is what you mean. I think you don't know how to say this, but I think what you're actually asking is this. And that's what I think about it. Like I definitely do this, you know, I definitely, especially with people I'm close to. If I'm very emotional, I completely lose the ability to express myself, and I'll often go and then just get wound up and then vomit out something where if somebody came at that in bad faith, they could be like, how dare you say, but if somebody comes at it with compassion and go, look, I know you're upset and I think what you're trying to say is this, you can actually get work done. And I think that's my point, is that jumping on people, I don't know what it accomplishes.
Very little. It's all control stuff, and control is usually based in fear. Like, and we all do it as well. Like, I remember having like difficult family discussions and me trying to really steer the way a conversation went because I was just so afraid of what might happen, you know. Yep. And so we all have this. I'm also not saying that I'm free of this at all. But it is that thing of like, I really noticed it. It's funny we're referencing all our guests, but like when we were talking to Emily and she was talking about veganism, and I said to her, like, I could talk to you about anything because you're not lecturing me. Mm-hmm. There is a real sense of that. There's a real sense of when people do not put pressure but just give their opinion. It is the way, it really is the way to do it. And like what you're saying, it's not going to change in the moment. Like, the real changes that if I've had any influence on other people, it will be where they say, I see you doing this thing. I'd like to maybe do that thing. Can you tell me something about how that is for you? Rather than me going, listen, you really need to.
This is the way. I've done the research, and this is here are the 8 hot tips about how to maximize your
Yeah, exactly, and it's such a lovely exploration as well to do that together. And I do think that's definitely one of the most important tenets of the podcast. But it will be interesting because so far the people we've had on all feel the same about communication. Even if they have other ideas than us, they their ideas about conversation are very similar.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what will happen, and I think it should be good that we would do it if someone came on who's like, no, you cannot say this, and you cannot say that. And if we could then have a free exploratory conversation with them.
Yeah, because it's all very well and nice to be like, draw a little circle around it. This is how we communicate, and we love it in here. It's really comfortable.
Yeah.
But you are excluding.
I mean,
to an extent,
it is a middle ground, because at least the ideas that are being explored aren't all the same.
Yeah.
So like, and people do have different views or experience of things, but everyone communicates, with the same kind of rules.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see what happens when it's not that way.
Yeah, it's for me. I just want things to be useful, beneficial. Like I used to work on cruise ships. I've told you this before, but I used to work on cruise ships, and I did Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and herbs. And one of the things I had to do was I would give lectures. I give about 3 lectures a week. Introductions to Chinese medicine. Here's acupuncture for chronic pain. Things like this, and just little PowerPoints and chats. To just like let people know. Like, this is what it can do, this is what it can offer you, this is how it works, this kind of stuff. Really like bringing people from zero knowledge to just a little bit, And about twice a month, I would set up my little projector screen, and I would look at the audience, and in the front row, there would be somebody sat there with their arms crossed and a face like thunder. And they would sit all the way through my presentation until the very end, when there was a Q&A section. It's like 25 minutes of talking, and at the end, I was like, anyone have any questions? The hand shoots up.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, yes, a recent article from the British Medical Journal, blah, 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 acupuncture is completely... Blah, 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 and just raging. And they were never like... It was never good faith. It was never like, come here, I read this journal article that kind of contradicts a bit of what you said. Like, that I can deal with, you know? But it was always very emotional. And I'm like, you were on vacation. You were on a cruise ship. You're a very busy person. You have like 5-7 days here where you can relax, and you've chosen to spend half an hour of that time seething, sat in the front row, furious at me, and then to attack me. And like, after a couple of times, that just stops affecting you altogether. And like, anytime there was, I had a little Google News thing, Google News alert set up. So anytime there was like Chinese medicine in the news, usually depicted with aggressive misinformation. Please come at me in the comments, but there is a war on Chinese medicine in the media, and the way it's depicted is criminal. But anyway, I was always able to come back. I was like, that British Medical Journal meta-analysis is flawed because of this and this and this and this. Yeah. And again, to talk about the 98%, 2%, that doesn't mean there aren't flaws with the research into Chinese medicine. There doesn't mean there aren't risks associated. But it does mean that, like, you're paying attention to the 2% and not the 98% there. But there was no conversation to be had, because I quickly realized with those people, because remember, there's a crowd, okay? There might be 20, 30 people there, and there's one person attacking me. So I'm like, I was completely capable of destroying that person's argument, right? Yeah. That did no good. No. The person felt worse. I didn't benefit anything.
No, you don't feel great either.
No, because my job is I do my work in the clinic. I don't give a shit what you think about me outside of there. My work was with my patients, and then the rest of the people in the crowd would get just uncomfortable. It's not nice to see people arguing. But then if I didn't challenge that person, I kind of looked weak, and then those horrible thoughts were now spreading out through the crowd and stuff. And I'm just like, that. In that form of engagement, everybody loses.
Yeah. I think the thing I wrote down is trigger, because the trigger is a bit of a buzzword as well, but I do think it's a good one for like, the things that we respond to really emotionally are things we are not comfortable being with in peace, kind of, and it can be really small things. Like, obviously, that's quite a big thing if someone is sitting there seething. But you can have it in, like, my partner will say something to me, and I will be like, because I'm very aware of that now. Like, I try to really look to see, am I actually a bit triggered now? So you might say something critical of me, and I'll go, and then you go, but if you can see it, then there is a little halfway house where you can at least say, okay, I'm just going to go for a walk now, or I need a bit of, you realize that at that time you're not going to be at your best, but like with anything that you give attention, it can then shrink a little bit as well. But if you're completely triggered, you're just in it, you're angry, you're upset, whatever, and you can't really, it's all emotion.
Yeah.
Something has, I liked on that Netflix show, Queer Eye, which me and Yvonne sometimes watch. I think those guys are so sweet. And they had this thing where they say like, when it's hysterical, it's historical. I thought that was quite good.
Yeah, that's really good.
You know, if there's something that happened to you. But
do you mind? Sorry, no.
No, you go.
No, just in terms of being triggered, I think one of the interesting things there is that I use the word triggered all the time.
Yeah.
And but the way I use it is, you've said something to me that has triggered a massively emotional reaction to me.
Yeah.
So what I use it for is like, by the way, just so you know, you said something small.
Yeah.
And you probably didn't mean it.
Yeah.
But I'm now having a hugely emotional reaction. So I'm just like informing you.
Yeah.
I'm not like, how dare you do that to me?
No.
I'm just like, my response to what you just said is massively disproportionate. I don't even like that phrase. I'm having a big response. Something you said has touched on something in me.
Yeah.
But it's like, so I'm gonna spend some time with that.
Yeah.
I don't then turn that triggering back on you.
Exactly.
Because usually it's something small. And again, I think this is maybe a bit of concept creep. There's different types of trigger. Like if somebody has had something catastrophically traumatic and criminal happen to them, and then somebody deliberately brings them back to that place and triggers them, that's different.
Yeah.
You know, I think triggered can mean different things, but like if somebody just says something a bit innocuous to you and you respond, I think there's power, and it's that 98%, 2% thing where I think taking your power back in that can be, it can be empowering,
100%. And this is actually an excellent example of, when you were talking, I was going to say, I hate trigger warnings. Mm-hmm. But then I thought when you said like, but certain things can be really impactful, I was like, but also I don't completely hate trigger warnings. Yeah. Like if someone on the news says, hey, listen, this might be heavy going, I think that's completely fair. If you're touching on the darkest aspects of humanity, for even if we don't have any real baggage there, like if you are if the telly is on and my kids are watching and you're going to show them some nightmarish scenario from the Middle East, for instance, like that's going to go straight in there and that's not going to be good, you know. So in that case, it's fair. But I think what you're saying is like the world will trigger you. Because even if people say small, so it's kind of that, I don't like that concept, for instance, of safe spaces at university, because actually university should be, I think, a place where you're challenged with new ideas, and the safeness is in the fact that they're going to be held by everybody. And it's that thing in a relationship where I believe you and I have a safeness between us where we can look at those difficult things. The safeness is not coming from trying to eliminate all of them, because the world will come into your life. You can't go, we're going to just create a protective bubble and the world will not come in. That's not the way that works at all. But the thing with I'm going all over the shop now, but it is, I think that's such an important thing to realize. You've said something, and in our dynamic, it's having this huge effect on me, but it's not like, so you shut up. It's like, so I'm just letting you know that, so you understand what's going on. And it's also what you were saying there when you said, I don't care how you view me outside. Now, I don't believe you literally don't give a shit, because I'd say you do care to an extent, but that's another 98% or whatever.
Sure.
But where was I going with the... when people,
the angry person in the seminar versus my patients in clinic, or
and then, well, we had it at I was doing, and we sometimes still perform a play about Renine Ambush in West Clare, and there's always a Q&A after the fact, which is fielded by our fabulous director. He wrote the thing. Dermot Petty wrote it, and
So the Reneen ambush was an IRA operation that went a bit sideways, just for context.
Exactly. I was just thinking about crediting everyone. So it's made by Joan O'Hanlon and Dermot Petty. Anyway, but Dermot fields questions afterwards and there was one we did recently where someone was very triggered, and they felt that so the IRA intended to hit a convoy. They did, and they killed 6 British soldiers. And what I thought was very good about this play was that actually they really showed some of the negative impact, because quite often people will say, oh, that was the IRA around the War of Independence, that was the good IRA, and then later we had the bad IRA. Even that shows kind of a dichotomy that's false, you know. But in this play, I thought it was very good that they also, for instance, showed the sadness of the partner of one of the men who was killed. But then this person got very angry, and like you said, was seething for the entire performance, and then just started kind of saying, I have a question. He didn't have a question. And he was just like, why did you not mention the names of the 5 soldiers that were killed? I think maybe they were RSC men, so they were kind of Irish but working for the British. And Dermot politely fielded that and gave a bit of pushback, and they talked about it. But then the person will never be satisfied, because, and you nearly kind of, in Dutch you would like say, like, what do you want? Do you want blood? Like, what can I give you that will actually satisfy? Nothing will satisfy, because he felt that should have been the way. I felt it's a story about a historical event,
and it's also a story. It needs to be a narrative.
Exactly, it's a narrative, and it already shows multiple sides. But we can't do like a historical thing where we're naming everything. Like, it has to have a bit of.
It doesn't work as a narrative.
It has
anymore.
to have a bit of a flow as a narrative as well. But then it's like when someone is triggered, nothing will get resolved. Is I suppose what I'm saying. So you kind of, but even the fact, I think that was where what I was going to, was that you kind of say it doesn't impact you as much anymore. And it's like, yeah, it really doesn't so much, because you've seen it happen a number of times, a huge number of times, let's say in your case. And you just go, clearly a lot of this is on you.
Yeah.
Like, it's not all on them, because you are putting in the trigger that makes it happen. But you really need to take a bit of agency. And that was one of the very powerful things that Joe Flynn said to me, who was our guest 2 weeks ago. About I had a long-term relationship with someone, not a love relationship, but it doesn't matter anyway. And they'd done a lot of wrong to me, which had provoked a certain response. And he went like, now, it's very understandable that you responded that way, but you also need to take ownership for the fact that your response also had some negative in it. And I really like that. Like, I actually, funnily enough, I am comfortable with that. Like, because it is like you say, you give yourself, you get some agency back. You're not just a victim of something. You're also like, and what did I do that I could have done better?
Yeah. Or what am I getting out of this?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Why? Yeah. What benefit is playing this role for me? But yeah.
And I almost think the imperfections in, the imperfections in conversation and the getting triggered and having big responses and stuff, that's almost where the gold is. That's where the opportunity for really interesting stuff happens. And I don't think you always need to go there. Sometimes it's so nice to get together and talk shite. Talk absolute shite. There's nothing on the line. Nothing needs to be, nothing needs to be discussed or resolved or looked at in a deeper way. But if you are interested in like really connecting with people, you have to be open to hurting and being hurt. You have to be open to
100%
creating this space between you. I have a lot of examples of this, but situations where like somebody said something that hurt me and I was like, yeah, that was shit. I'm going to have a response to that, but I need to go away and take a few days, or something I said to somebody else and it was only years later that it came back. And I think existing in the world, opening your mouth and expressing honestly means you're going to risk hurting people. Yeah, and offending people. I take two different things. I'm not too worried about like offending people, but I do hate hurting people, and sometimes both happen simultaneously, and that's tough. But like, me and you breathe the same air. You exhale, I inhale. We pass viruses and bacteria to each other. As we move through the universe, we create harm and benefit. You know, and that's. The only way to stop that is to stop breathing. Yeah. And I think...
And even then, that would have a profound effect.
Yeah. So it's I'm not sure what I'm saying there, but I think that there have been situations where people have thrown out something really, really stupid, and by looking beyond it to what they were trying to say, there's real gold there. Or looking into the response, there's real gold there. And that's where empathy... That's where coming at things in good faith, that's where seeing the person as a person and not just a collection of opinions is really important. And that's where being in person is important as well.
Oh, that's a very good point. And it's the believing that the other person might know something you don't as well. Like, it's funny with... there is also with conversation, there's also kind of an emptying of a bucket, kind of, there's like, we're filled up with these things and something comes to the fore. Like when you and I just started this podcast this episode today, I was just like very comfortably like talking to you. And then suddenly I go and mention COVID. I'm like, no, why? Why
you
did
didn't
I do
mention
that?
COVID.
I
you mentioned vaccines, but now you've mentioned COVID.
I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But it's because... it's probably then fear again, but it is like when the bucket is being emptied. First you get the loose stuff on the top, and then apparently, like, and I do want to make this clear actually, that I don't want anyone to take away from this that I have a particular opinion on that particular subject. The hill that I am willing to die on is the one about open communication. That's the real. So if anyone comes at me, that's the thing I want to, like, I don't know about a lot of that medical stuff. I have some educated guesses and ideas, but that's all fine. And like I said, in my environment, the whole spectrum is there, from extreme to that side to the other side.
From the good side to the bad side.
Thank you, Luke. That's No, from Darth Vader to Luke Skywalker. It's But I feel very passionately about free expression. I really do. And that's one where I'm like, no, I don't care. That's one that's one I will fight you on. Not physically, but I mean, that's one I will stand for. Well, hopefully not fight, actually, just talk. But I mean, I heard someone say recently, like, the people doing censorship have never been in the right historically. And like, even that's one where you need to probably go, never is a strong word, and historically is a long time. But I was just re-listening Lord of the Rings, and I loved when Treebeard says, like, it's something like that. I think the king says, "Oh, these lands are given to you forever," and he's like, "Oh, forever is." And so this is Treebeard is an end to like a walking tree, basically. It's deeper than that, guys. It's deeper than that. But he said he lived for. Is the eldest thing walking the earth. He says forever is too long a time, even for me. So anyway, like when I say like never and historically, those are also to be taken with a pinch of salt. But I do believe that's usually not a good. It's just not a good impulse.
Yeah, and I understand it. You know, as human beings, particularly rational, logical creatures, we want to break the world down into atoms, the indivisible. We want to break the world down into something where you're like, I know exactly what this is. Okay. the X is complicated. Y is a bit simpler. Z is just one thing.
Yeah.
You know, and then we combine all these, you know, we build these things up, but we need something fundamental to hold on to.
Yeah.
And I think nowadays a lot of those things are opinions.
Yeah.
You know, that we want to build up a sense of self or a sense of right and wrong, a sense of how things should be done, because it's like, should we do it this way or this way? Definitely this way.
And the other one is evil.
And the other one is wrong,
Yeah.
you know. And that's really reassuring. It's a really reassuring way to look at the world, where you're like, well, I've really thought about this and it turns out X is right and Y is wrong.
Yeah.
And I particularly hate how science is used to this, like a research paper.
We were on the same wavelength. Like, it was just, the word was popping in my head. A recent
research paper says that you should do X and not Y. And you're like, any actual scientist will immediately start like looking at that paper for flaws, because they're all flawed. That's literally how things work. And then you're like, okay, will they recreate it? What context? Like, no scientist looks at a single paper and goes, the question is answered. But science in the media is used that way. And I think a lot of things are being used that way. And to say that that it's not digital, that it's not right and wrong, but that it's analog, that there are things that are maybe more right but still have some flaws. And then there are things that are more wrong, but still have some benefits. Like that's all of a sudden the world becomes a lot more complicated. All of a sudden you have to hang out with people and deal with people that maybe you don't particularly want to be dealing with. All of a sudden you have to start questioning yourself a lot more. It's a lot of work. It's easier to do things the other way.
100%. I remember during the pandemic, a friend of mine saying to me that he was very shocked by the fact that people didn't believe in science anymore. And I was like, oh yes, I'm shocked as well by the fact that people don't want to examine things freely anymore. But he didn't mean that. He meant authority.
Yeah.
And that's the thing.
Yeah.
It didn't mean science, it meant authority.
Yeah.
We need to listen to the authorities.
Yeah.
And there is, like, I remember when I did political science, they would say, like, if you want to get your bicycle fixed, you go to a bicycle repair, what do you call this shit in English? Bicycle repair shop, or any mechanic, doesn't matter.
Bike shop.
Yeah. But so there was that was one of the arguments, for instance, why politicians would need to be professional politicians rather than just a member of the public doing their turn, as I think in ancient Greece they had like a combination of that, where there was a lot, and so there definitely is truth in that. Like, but that's why people always say when online they give a medical opinion, for instance, they say, and talk to your own physician, because your physician will be able to talk to you about the specifics of your situation. So definitely that physician has more authority to speak than me, but that doesn't mean that I can't say, listen, doc, I feel something's going wrong here that maybe you've not seen. Can we, Yeah.
And, the idea of like examining everything from a million different angles and self-examining, it's very hard to, like, it is inefficient.
Bandwidth problem, like,
And like, we do need to simplify the universe. 100%. We do need to like, just be like, I know there's more to examine there in terms of my opinion on this and my response to that. But for today, I just need to get the kids to school and get the car fixed. So it's not the time. The other thing I think is really powerful about conversations, and I don't think, by the way, these are better or worse, but I just think in the world we live in, one of the beautiful things about conversations is it happens between individuals.
Yeah.
Whereas things like research papers or, government rulings on things happen to groups. And I think we are living in a world where there's a lot of interactions between groups and institutions. And I think there is a greater and greater need for interactions between individuals to counter that. I think we need both. I think we absolutely need both.
100%. And I kind of like the fact that a lot of this conversation has also been about podcasts. And I remember listening to the first long form podcast that I listened to. I think it was actually Mark Maron interviewing Dylan Moran, which is a random fucking, but I was like, oh, I like this. I just like a couple of guys talking. Great. But you see that there's a great, and we'll see, I suppose, what that can do and what it can do. It's a bit like, my wife's a psychotherapist, and she is now doing a lot of online work, and during the pandemic, a lot of people did online work, and it's one of those things where it's like, actually, turns out that's pretty great for therapy for a lot of reasons, and for some things it's not so good.
Yes.
Like for somatic work, it's harder, but for people who have social anxiety, it's great that they can do and I think it'll be the same with podcasts. Like there is some connection, but it is kind of a one-way connection, and so it doesn't replace. Direct, but it is nice. And I've, as someone who is, to come back to the surface a bit of it, like as someone who works a lot from home on my own, it's just a lovely thing to hear people talking when you're not actually meeting a friend or you don't have time to do that. It's lovely to have like, oh, I like listening to these people. And what you then seen as well with things like, for instance, Joe Rogan podcast, bing, another bell going off, is that there are presented a lot of different opinions and some fucking wacky ones that are
real wacky.
Yeah. But that people actually didn't go, oh, now I won't listen anymore. But they go, isn't it lovely that in good faith all these people are, and even some people who've done some like Alex Jones, where you're like, they've done some things that are really bad. Yeah. But still giving them the time of day and airing it out and having it, I think it is much better. And then when it gets approached cynically, when they try to cancel Joe Rogan, for instance, which was done in a very cynical way, and everyone just went, nah. I thought that was great. And it really shows the democratic power as well, where it's like, no, that's bullshit what you're trying to do. So it's an interesting format that we've dipped our toe in. And also, I'm such a coffee addict that I've just grabbed Anthony's cold morning coffee.
Yeah, which is also a natural coffee.
And I will tell you, it is excellent. Good. You're going to have to tell me, what is this Anam coffee?
No, this is 3FE. We had friends come down from Dublin and brought us, I think Katie specifically asked them for the weirdest coffee they could find at the coffee. So I think it's a natural coffee from Thailand. So it's unwashed, so it's all fruity and stuff. It is quite good cold.
Lovely. Yeah. I'm actually really enjoying
this. There you
go. Like the chat with yourself, which isn't cold at all.
Yeah, there we go. Well, let's focus on the coffee for a bit. Yeah. Bart. That was a conversation about conversation that only partially disappeared up its own arse.
Oh, deep. Endoscopy. Is that
a podcast Ouroboros.
Yeah. Come at us, lads. But you look a little worried, so that's probably good. I can see in your eyes you look a little bit worried. It's probably good.
No. I'll be honest, I need the bathroom. But
that's also worrying.
I've this is underlying a lot of what we're doing, so it's good to put it out there.
100%. And what I like that. I like that idea of proper free speech. But what I've really enjoyed with the podcast, which has been such a big boon that I hadn't expected, is just how people, a bit like what you said about the musician telling you, well, the opposite, but the musician telling you how to feel about their songs, that so many people have come back to us, go, oh, this resonated with me, that resonated with me, and it was things that I would have never thought about.
Yeah,
which is lovely. So
it's
you're all
and
fabulous.
Also shows that we're like not completely in control as well. Like there's stuff like we've put out there. I'm like, oh, I think that's very, very meaty, and I think people connect with that, and it hasn't. And then there's been like some small throwaway things that people have been like, oh, I really resonated with that. And like, beautiful, absolutely. Take, if there's anything of value here for you, take it, and we're so happy.
Well, and that's I hope that kind of counters the up our own arses, which of course we are. Come on, look at us. Of course we are. But it's look at us. Listen to us. No, but I think that it is outside of our control. It's kind of that. Is that the Hemingway thing where it's just like sit down, do the writing, like you're doing a bit of writing. Like it's much more of the we've committed to doing it, but it's not that we're like, oh, this is me spitting out all these gold,
all these hot takes.
No, it's just like we're doing it, and apparently it does something lovely. We're enjoying doing it. Thank you very much.
This has been Weshtern Philosophy and our rambling exploration of conversation. Follow us on the socials at Weshtern Philosophy Pod. If you want to support the podcast, you can buy us a cup of coffee via the link in the episode description below. We'll be back next week with another topic. Slán.